The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my own disciple. Which of you wishing to construct a tower does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there's enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers would laugh at him and say, "This one began to build but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of the Lord. Well, today I have done in my years as a Catholic priest 536 total weddings. Now, one of the things that I actually love doing is the preparation that goes into the wedding, working with the couples. And those who have been under my direction will tell you that the one thing that I stress, in addition to their having faith, is good interpersonal communication skills. As you all know, words are very important. I make it clear to them that they must be able to communicate open and completely to their spouses. They must make sure their spouses understand the message as intended, and they must make sure that they know that words have consequences. But evidently there are some people in the world that do not follow that principle in their day-to-day living, and I'd like to share with you some examples. One year, a husband decided to buy his mother-in-law a cemetery plot as a Christmas gift. The next year, he didn't buy her a gift. When she asked him why, he replied, "Well, you still haven't used the gift I bought you last year." And that's how the fight began. My wife sat down on the couch next to me as I was flipping the channel. She asked, "What's on TV, honey?" I said, "Dust." And then the fight got started. My wife was hinting around that she wanted for our upcoming anniversary. She said, "I want something shiny that goes from 0 to 200 in about 3 seconds. I bought her a scale, and then the fight got started. I rear-ended a car this morning, so there we were alongside the road, and slowly the other driver got out of his car. You know how sometimes you get so stressed and little things just seem so funny? Yeah, well, I couldn't believe it. He was a dwarf. He stormed over to my car, looked up at me, began shaking his fingers at me, and shouted, "I am not happy." So I looked down at him and said, "Well, which one are you?" My favorite. Words are important. When our lawnmower broke and wouldn't run, my wife kept hinting to me that I should get it fixed. But somehow I always had something else to take care of first. The truck, the car, playing golf, always something that was important to me. Finally, she thought of a clever way to make her point. When I arrived home one day, I found her seated in the tall grass, busily snipping away with a tiny pair of sewing scissors. I watched shortly for a time and then went into the house. I was gone only a minute, and then when I came out again, I handed her a toothbrush. She looked at me with a puzzled look and said, "What's this for?" I said, "When you finish cutting the grass, you might as well sweep the driveway." Now, the doctor said I will walk again, but I will always have a limp. And then there was an encounter I had at St. Mary's Hospital a couple of weeks ago. I was visiting a couple people, and one of the nurses in the hallway, I didn't know who she was, but she knew who I was, and she said, "Could you go visit Mrs. So-and-so over in such and such room?" And so I went to go visit this woman, and she wasn't a parishioner, she wasn't Catholic, but that's all right with me. And she's an 80-year-old woman, very spicy. I love spicy people advanced in age, a lot of wisdom there. And so we got to talking, and I really loved our conversation. Well, at one point, politics came up, which is a dangerous subject, as you all know. And I told her how on beginning the day after Labor Day, Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, I will be getting out, as I always do, my hip boots, because the stuff is going to start coming out in massive quantities, you know, those political speeches. And so at one point I looked at her and I said, you know, you've been going to the polls a lot. I said, what criteria do you use? You know, with all the distrust and all the dislike people have for the members of our United States Congress these days, what criteria do you use to determine for whom you're going to vote? And she says, I just kind of try to figure out which one I think is going to lie the least. Yeah. Words, words, words. Jesus says in Matthew 5, verse 37, one of my favorite quotes, say yes when you mean yes, say no when you mean no. Everything beyond that comes from the evil one. Today's gospel, as I mentioned, is very important. It's found for the most part in St. Luke's gospel. There are a few parts of it that are also echoed in Matthew. Mark and John know nothing about this passage. Once again, Jesus is on the road heading south towards Jerusalem, where he will lay down his life for us. Now, all of a sudden, once again, abruptly, he turns to the crowds, we're told, and begins to instruct them about the nature of discipleship. What's interesting is that he no longer addresses the 12 apostles, but rather the crowds. And he gives them 3 conditions. If you would be my disciple, says Jesus. Condition number 1, and this one troubles people, shocks people, in fact, on hearing the text. Unless you hate your father and your mother, your sister and your brother, your family, you cannot be my disciple, says Jesus. Many people have come to me through the years and says, he wants me to hate my family? Not in the way that we think. You see, Jesus, many times through the scriptures, and we all know this, is always telling us to love one another, and he's not changing his thoughts now in this passage. But you see, what's interesting, the word that Luke chooses to use to define what Jesus is saying, the Greek verb misein, literally means to hate. Isn't it interesting when you go to the same passage in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, Jesus will say something different. He will say, unless you love me more than father or mother. He does not use the word hate there. And other translations of the Bible, other than our own, chose to weaken down the word. Jesus will say there, rather than hate, unless you turn your back on your father and mother. But the word he uses, misein, is hate, pure and simple. But he's not using it in the sense of it being an emotion. He's not talking about feelings. He's not even talking about animosity. What he's saying is this: you have got to love me so much, you have got to be loyal to me so much, that the feelings of loyalty and love you have for your own family will seem as though you are hating them. They will be less than. Or in other words, pure and simple, point blank, Jesus is saying there are times when you may have to choose your love for me even over your own blood relatives. Condition number 2. We've heard this from them before in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. But now the Lord individualizes it. Unless you pick up your cross, you cannot be my disciple. What's that mean? We all carry crosses. Being a disciple means entailing the wood of the cross. But crosses mean different things for different people. For some people, they are health or other issues. For other people, they can be other things. But what he's saying to us there, pure and simple, it's going to cost you to be a disciple. And then thirdly, and I love the way this one's expressed in the Greek, unless you're willing to give up all your possessions, renounce all your possessions, says Jesus. Notice, please, he's not asking everybody to become a nun or a monk. There are times in the Gospels when Jesus does ask certain people to give it all up. There are times when he asks people who are of means not to give it all up, but rather to use your resources for the gospel. The bottom line for Jesus on possessions, when you take the Gospels all together, as we should, is it's where your heart is loyal. Do you possess your possessions, or are you possessed by your possessions? Do you love God, or do you love what you have more? And so what Jesus is saying, and that Greek verb, apostate, means to say bye-bye to your possessions, if called to do so. Now, in something that's very important, he says before you commit, before you sign on the dotted line, calculate, discern, think. And he gives two examples. First of all, he talks about a man who was building a tower. What's the deal about the tower? On large agricultural estates back in Palestine back then, people would build these towers for security reasons. They were kind of like alarm systems. They would have a servant who would go up there. There would be servants rotating around the clock. The whole idea was to keep eye on the master's property for thieves and marauders. Jesus says, you're not going to be like this guy who says, I'm going to build a tower. And he doesn't bother to look and see if he has money or materials to finish the project. He gets it about halfway up, and that's it. Jesus says, the people coming around are going to look and say, what kind of bozo is that? He started what he couldn't finish. Isn't it interesting? When I was looking at this parable, couldn't help but think about the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae situation. How many people took huge loans, bought lots of properties, built lots of homes, had no way of paying them back? Seems like things repeat themselves through history, huh? And then his second parable, the parable of a general. Jesus says, who wouldn't be like this general who had 10,000 troops? He knew there was an army on the other side of the hill. He couldn't see it, so he sends out a reconnaissance squad to check it out. They come back and say, 2-to-1 odds. 20,000 of them, 10,000 of us. Jesus says a wise king is going to say, let's have some tea and crumpets and talk about it. Why do you want to butcher your soldiers in an army that could easily overcome them? No, Jesus says, sit down and talk peace. You avoid the slaughter. But in other words, his point is very clear. Think before you sign on. Before you say, I will be your disciple, Lord, calculate what it might cost you. Does it cost? Absolutely. I was sharing with the people throughout this weekend something that's going on that the liberal media will not report. You won't find it on NBC, ABC, CBS. And it's happening every day and even as we speak. There are places in the world where Catholics are being slaughtered because of their faith. Just a few weeks ago in Iraq, 2 families with their cars were heading to the local Catholic church. They were stopped by the Al-Qaeda. They were pulled out of their cars and forced to get on their knees on the ground. The adults were shot in the back of the head with AK-47 rifles. The children were all beheaded. Why? Because they were heading to Mass. This is going on in Northeast India. This is going on in Nigeria. This is going on in many places in the world, even South America. People who are being slaughtered because of their faith. And you know what? They still keep going to church. If somebody told you over the television or radio this morning that coming here to Fatima for Mass, you might get ambushed on Route 60 and get yourself beheaded, would you be in the pews this morning? Would you? I remember in my own life a number of years ago when I first became pastor. I'd been associate pastor for a couple of years, and being an associate pastor is a piece of cake. It's fun. I wish somebody would have drilled that in my head more. But you know, it's always fun because when anybody wants to complain or has a problem, you always listen to them, of course, and then you say, well, you know, the pastor's room is right up the hallway, and here's his personal cell number. You can call him. He'll be glad to discuss this with you. You know, you're only going to be there a little short time, at least I thought, and then nobody else wanted the place. I became pastor of what was then the second largest parish in the diocese. It had a huge Catholic school, for as far as Catholic schools go, 289 students. Very few of the students came to church on Sunday. They could not pay their bills. And so I began to pray about the problem and look at the problem, and I found a solution. I was going to convert the entire parish and school to stewardship as a way of life. The first person I talked with was the parish school principal, who was a sister. She had been there for a number of years. And I told her, after studying the situation, where our problems were and what we needed to do, and she refused to participate. Well, I tried to get her to come on board, and she was adamant that I was doing the wrong thing. And so I prayed. And just so you know, before I make a decision, I always pray and pray a lot. Sometimes days, sometimes weeks. I analyze the situation carefully. I look at research and data that are available about the situation. I consult with other professionals, people who have been there, done that. And then I go back to prayer, and if the Lord is calling me in that direction, I respond. Well, this was the first time I made a major decision in my priesthood, and it cost me dearly. I called the sister in, and I informed her that I was not going to renew her contract. The problem was I would discover that the diocese, the education department of the diocese, would be my biggest enemy, because they have a policy which says, as pastor and CEO of the parish school, if I choose not to renew the contract of the principal for the upcoming year, I have to notify that principal the first week of February, and their contract does not expire to the first week of August. Try living with a lame duck, angry principal for 5 months. It's not a pleasant experience. And I can tell you, all hell broke loose. She began to tell everybody in the community that I fired her. Legally, there's a difference between non-renewal of contract and firing. I did not renew her contract. There were physical threats, numerous physical threats. There was even one death threat. And the way people fight these days, they either get on the internet, on Facebook, they slander your name, they butcher you, they spread lies and rumors and all kinds of stuff. And I went through all of that, and truth be known, it probably took a couple years of life off of me. It was horrible. I had no one to talk to. But my heart kept telling me, you're doing the right thing. And so the thing that hurt the most, when I first got to the parish as the associate pastor, the guy that I relieved, who was the associate pastor at the time, said to me, there's a young couple you can go hang out with. He said, I hang out with them just about every night. He said, they're nice, they're discreet, they're a lot of fun. And so I took him up on the invitation, and I went to this young couple's house 2-3 nights a week. We'd drink a beer, have a piece of pizza, we'd talk, we'd laugh, we'd cry, we shared secrets, we did all kinds of stuff. Well, I'll never forget, in the heat of the battle, when everybody was angry and upset about my firing sister, the wife, Kathy, called me one day. She said, Father Jim, is it true that you fired sister? To which I said, Kathy, no, I didn't renew her and she interrupted me and said, yes, you did fire her. I never want to speak to you again as long as I live. And she hung up. That was 20 years ago, and we haven't spoken since. You got to be willing to give up even friendships for the sake of the gospel. And you know the irony of it all, the pathetic irony? Within 5 years, the enrollment in the school went from 289 students to 546 students. And the best part of it all, tuition was $300 per student, and that includes fees. I wanted to eliminate tuition because I do not believe in tuition in a Catholic school. But you know what? That's water over the dam. You live and you learn. But I learned one important lesson. To thine Savior be true. You have to be true to him, and he will vindicate you in time. The one story I'd like to share with you about a mother, in fact a couple actually, that had to take Jesus' word seriously. It was August the 15th, a few years ago. August the 15th, as you all know, is the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's a holy day in the church. And I just done the 7:30 morning Mass, and I was waiting to do the 12 noon Mass. And I thought I'd open up the mail, separate the junk from the good stuff, and I was opening up the mail that I got, and there was a letter, a handwritten letter from a woman. And it read something like this. Dear Father Jim, you probably don't know me. I don't belong to your parish, but I've been coming there for a couple years. And she said, I just want you to know about something that happened a year ago. She said, I came to your Mass on the Feast of the Assumption, the 7:30 morning Mass, and my heart was very heavy. What happened, Father, the day before, on August the 14th, our high school daughter, a 17-year-old, informed her father and me that she was pregnant. She also told us that she wanted us to drive her to Pittsburgh to have an abortion or she would kill herself. She said, my husband and I were terrified. It wasn't about her being pregnant, she said, but we couldn't bear the thought of our daughter killing herself. And so she said we didn't sleep that night, needless to say. We tossed and turned all night long. But by the end of the night, as the morning began to dawn, she says we decided that even though it was totally against our faith, we were going to drive her to Pittsburgh so that she wouldn't kill herself. And she said, so I got up on August the 15th to go to that Mass, and she said, during the course of the Mass, during the prayers of the faithful, you made some petition about bringing an end to abortion. She said, that hit my heart like a silver bullet, and I knew what I had to do. So I went home, she said, I got my daughter up, I told her, you're going to Mass with me at 12 noon. She said, I came to the 12 noon Mass at your church. You did that Mass as well. You did the prayers of the faithful, except you changed the wording on the abortion petition a little bit. But she said the meaning was the same. And she said, on our way back home, I told my daughter, we will not take you to have this abortion. And she said, I write this letter to you 1 year later. As I look over to the side in the crib, there is my beautiful 1-year-old granddaughter. She said, Father, if you had not spoken those words, she would not be here today. And I would end up talking to the mother, and I told her, if the Lord had not spoken those words, your granddaughter would not be here. My brothers and sisters, ask anyone in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, Iraq, Iran, whatever the case may be. To be a disciple of the Lord may cost you your very life. But Jesus warns us today that that could be the case. Sticking with the Lord may cost you family relationships, may cost you friendships. But Jesus tells us today, before you sign on the dotted line, pray and think about it. Are you willing to pay the price? Are you willing to come forward with the cost? If not, then think again. I pray in a special way that none of you will ever have to go through the agony of choosing Christ over anything else. May your faith always be comfortable and easy. But if you are put to the test, I then pray that God will give you the faith and the courage to follow Jesus and nothing else.